Good morning from the Freedom of Information and Privacy Association. I'm Patrick Farnsworth, and this is your Access and Privacy Online News Summary for Saturday, December 13th. As we head into the holiday season, it's another big week for access and privacy. Local Journalism Initiative reporting uncovers serious questions about water safety, council transparency, and digital surveillance at home. Nationally, we're seeing renewed pressure around the Ring of Fire, critical minerals, and indigenous consent. Around the world, governments are reshaping whistleblower protections, social media rules for kids, and even how far U.S. presidential power can reach. We'll move from Canadian access to information stories through whistleblowers and privacy on campus and in our streets before turning to international developments, U.S. institutional dynamics, and America's growing influence on the digital rights of travelers. Let's dive in. We start with Canadian stories where access to information is doing exactly what it's supposed to do, surfacing risks and raising uncomfortable conversations about accountability. We'll start in Ontario with LGI reporter Thomas Kent at the Woolwich Observer. The story focuses on the impact of moving fast and breaking things, leaving vulnerable populations with negative impacts. The Ontario Disability Support Program, the ODSP, Action Coalition is pushing the government to reverse provisions on Bill 60. The bill proposes sweeping changes to the Residential Tenancies Act, including shorter eviction timelines, reduced appeal periods, and new restrictions on raising issues at hearings. Recent data obtained through Freedom of Information requests shows the number of ODSP recipients experiencing homelessness is rising, despite government messaging that tying ODSP increases to inflation has addressed affordability concerns. Next, LGI reporter Ed Smith at The Pointer brings us another access story from Southern Ontario. Officials in St. Catharines and the province's Environment Ministry knew for weeks that a system designed to filter harmful toxins from stormwater at a former GM site has been disconnected, but the public was never told of the risks. A Pointer Freedom of Information request revealed internal emails confirming the shutdown and an ongoing investigation, while residents were left in the dark about potential contamination in PCBs. The public was only made aware of the unfolding events after the Pointer obtained court documents and visited the site, raising questions about the state of the filtration system. The Pointer has filed multiple requests in this ongoing investigation. That includes seeking all inspection reports and field notes from site visits at the former GM site over the past year. However, the ministry was denied the request, citing the need to preserve the integrity of the current ongoing investigation. It's a textbook example of why people rely on access laws to fill the gap when governments choose secrecy over candor. Meanwhile, in Thunder Bay, LGI reporter Clint Fleary at tbnewswatch.com describes a council that doesn't want to be forced to meet the public. A proposed bylaw that would have required councillors to hold a minimum number of ward or town hall meetings a year was voted down 8-5, with some members insisting they shouldn't be told how to represent. If passed, the motion would have enabled a councillor or member of the public to bring a complaint to the Integrity Commissioner if anyone didn't meet the minimum. Supporters argued residents want more face-to-face accountability, not less. One councillor said he sees having a ward or a town hall meeting as his duty as an elected official because the feedback he has gained helps him make policy decisions. It's a small procedural fight that speaks volumes about how different elected officials understand access to information and practice, as well as the optional nature of public consultation and accountability. Similarly, in municipal politics, LGI reporter Soumya Loya at Shooting the Breeze reports that Crow's Nest Pass Council in Alberta is embarking on major procedural changes to its meeting bylaw after governance training. Councillors are considering land acknowledgements, live streaming or recording options, new rules for correspondence, and a return to regular committee of the whole meetings. Council also supported updating legislative references throughout its meeting bylaw to match the new Access to Information Act and the Protection of Privacy Act in Alberta. One councillor proposed lifting restrictions on electronic recording and electronic participation by councillors. The CAO noted privacy and legal issues with councillors not being in physical attendance. None of this is flashy, but it's exactly where transparency either gets baked into local public bodies or it is quietly sidelined. And in British Columbia, Ainsley Cruikshank at the Narwhal reports on access requests and a troubling impact on wildlife populations. It leaves BC and Ottawa in a conflict of responsibility for addressing the impacts of train and wildlife collisions. Provincial officials say they want a strategy to reduce collisions. Rail companies point to federal jurisdiction, and the federal government recognizes the claim while remaining silent on addressing the problem. The railways are required to report collisions to the BC government, but records obtained through Freedom of Information requests show reporting is both inconsistent and incomplete, obscuring the full scale. While local monitors recognize a problem without the reporting, it remains unclear exactly how many animals are struck and killed by trains in BC. The story raises uncomfortable questions about data collection, reporting obligations, and who is ultimately accountable when environmental risks fall into regulatory cracks. Bringing it back to Ottawa, the federal government has disclosed the first 8 projects to be managed by the new Defense Investment Agency, including submarines, Arctic over-the-horizon radar, and a fleet of early warning and control surveillance aircraft. The other projects include in-service support and software upgrades for the CC-130J Hercules transport aircraft and satellite communications procurements, but it is not managing the purchase of any land vehicles or fighter jets. The Liberal government had to disclose the projects in documents tabled in Parliament in response to a research request for information by a Conservative MP. Turning special attention to the Ring of Fire, Canadian Press long-form reporting digs into one of the most consequential access, consent, and resource governance files in the country. Reporter Liam Casey tells the story of Wibike and Neskantaga First Nations, 2 closely linked communities taking very different approaches to a proposed all-season road and a massive critical minerals play in northern Ontario. Wibike is trying to shape development from the inside, signing agreements and negotiating assessments, while Neskantaga stands firm against a project it fears will deepen existing harms and erode their sovereignty. Both are confronting a rapidly shrinking winter road season and staggering costs for basics like fuel and food, all while southern governments and companies frame the region as a solution for global supply chains. Canadian Press reporting also follows Australian mining giant Wyloo and its Eagle's Nest project, highlighting how nickel, copper, and other minerals are being marketed as essential for everything from semiconductors and satellites to defense applications. On paper, it's a world-class asset. On the ground, it's a landscape where climate change, colonial infrastructure, and decades of underinvestment collide. For access and privacy advocates, the Ring of Fire isn't just about mines. It's about who controls information, who sets the timelines, and whose version of public interest ultimately prevails. Staying in Canada, we have a set of stories that show how institutions, at home and abroad, respond when insiders, athletes, or vulnerable workers raise concerns. We begin in Winnipeg, where LGI reporter Maggie McIntosh at the Winnipeg Free Press reports that Professor Gino D'Stasio, a high-profile researcher at U of W, has been appointed interim president of the University of Winnipeg, just weeks after the sudden removal of former President Todd Mondor. The Board of Regents has offered little public explanation, denying any link to a whistleblower report filed with the Manitoba Ombudsman alleging misconduct. The Free Press has reviewed the allegations of misconduct and related evidence in the submission to the Ombudsman. D'Stasio, a long-serving academic leader credited with raising more than $12 million in research funding, now steps into a role marked by uncertainty about governance, workplace culture, and how universities handle internal disclosures. The university's latest news release states D'Stasio helped grow its Canada Research Chair program and overall research advocacy at U of W throughout his tenure. Meanwhile, an international-level whistleblower dispute around the World Anti-Doping Agency brings impact to its headquarters in Montreal. According to the Associated Press, U.S. officials and athlete groups are sharply criticizing WADA for what they call a lack of transparency and slow action related to the handling of positive tests following 23 elite Chinese swimmers ahead of the 2021 Tokyo Olympics. A letter sent to the head of WADA claimed their investigation into who leaked the information that led to the agency clearing the 23 Chinese swimmers was meant to intimidate and suppress whistleblowers. American athletes and lawmakers argue the agency failed in its duty to assess the case independently and communicate clearly with member nations, raising questions about whether WADA's processes adequately protect whistleblowers inside international sport, or the athletes who rely on the system for fairness. WADA has rejected the U.S. claims, but the dispute underscores how governance failures in global institutions can have direct impacts in Canada. WADA also commissioned its own report on the handling of the Chinese swimmer's case that concluded it was reasonable that WADA chose not to appeal the Chinese anti-doping agency's explanation that the positives came from contamination. On the East Coast, Emily Barron-Kadloff reports on new findings from the Center for Migrant Worker Rights Canada, documenting serious human rights concerns among female migrant workers employed in Nova Scotia's farms and seafood plants. More than half reported overcrowded housing, with as many as 20 women in a single unit, and nearly 70% said they were required to work in severe weather, including extreme heat. Most respondents also felt they were not adequately informed of their rights as workers or supports available to them upon arriving in Nova Scotia. A common theme uncovered by the research was related to how employers exercise control over the migrant workers. While not whistleblowers in the corporate sense, these women's testimonies form a collective disclosure about conditions that remain largely hidden from public view, a reminder that transparency depends on safe pathways to report harm, especially for workers at the margins. Our next Canadian segment focuses on privacy, from cameras at the curb to surveillance software on campus. LGI reporter Amanda Jeffrey at the Drayton Valley and District Free Press reports that the town of Drayton Valley has partnered with TELUS to install CCTV cameras at key intersections and public spaces. The 4 cameras were installed several years ago for a pilot program, but weren't monitored, and nobody could access the information on them after the pilot program ended. They have only become active again recently. Officials say the cameras are aimed at deterring crime and improving enforcement, not automated ticketing. Footage is retained for 14 days, and the town says it's following guidance from the Provincial Privacy Commissioner, including requiring law enforcement to make formal access to information requests before accessing stored video. The story is a good example of how small communities are quietly rolling out networked and potentially hackable public surveillance cameras empowered by national telecommunications firms, often with limited public debate about long-term risks, retention, and function creep. Meanwhile, in Kingston, LGI reporter Michelle Dory-Forstel at kingstonist.com covers an important arbitration decision at Queen's University over security and surveillance software. An arbitrator has partially sided with the Faculty Association, clarifying that term adjunct professors have the same right as other faculty to refuse invasive software on their own devices, and ordering the university to increase transparency around cyber threats and tech changes. Under the ruling, Queen's Information Technology Services must hold in-person information sessions for Faculty Association members, at least 4 months before introducing new major technological requirements. The ruling also requires a new Joint Technology Committee, better notice before major IT changes, and a renewed privacy review of the university's electronic monitoring policy by 2027. Within 30 days, the Faculty Association and the university must attempt to agree on an external provider to conduct a new privacy impact assessment of the software used in the endpoint system. If they cannot agree, the arbitrator will choose from a list of names submitted by both parties. It's a reminder that digital workplace surveillance is not just an abstract policy issue. It's playing out in grievance hearings, collective agreements, and classrooms across the country. Now on to international stories where we see impacts to protections that underpin transparency and digital rights. In Slovakia, the Associated Press reports that Parliament has approved a plan to dismantle the country's whistleblower protection office, despite strong criticism from opposition parties, prosecutors, and civil rights groups. President Peter Pellegrini must sign the legislation for it to become law and has shown reservations, but the government has a majority to override his possible veto. The government said it wants to create a new institution that would deal with the protection of whistleblowers and also crime victims. The government argues the existing framework was abused for political reasons and plans to replace it with a weaker institution housed under another authority. Critics warn this will chill reporting on corruption and undermine the rule of law, especially since the changes were rushed through with limited debate. In Australia, reporting by Rod McGurk details the rollout of a social media ban for children under 16, requiring major platforms to remove underage accounts and demonstrate compliance to the e-safety commissioner. The move is being celebrated by families affected by online harms, but it raises legitimate questions of balance around privacy, such as how platforms will verify age, what data will be collected, and whether new verification tools could themselves create surveillance risks. The communications minister, Annika Wells, warned young children who had so far evaded detection that they would eventually be caught, even with the use of VPN software. Australia's Privacy Commissioner Carly Kind has emphasized that there are strong privacy safeguards on paper, but implementation will be complex, and other countries are already watching this implementation closely. Shifting to the United States, a cluster of stories highlighting how structural decisions on courts, records, and technology can reshape transparency and accountability for years to come. First, the Associated Press reports that the U.S. Supreme Court is weighing a case that could further entrench a broad view of presidential power over independent agencies. Building on past rulings, the court's conservative majority appears open to weakening long-standing limits on the president's ability to fire agency heads. The 6 conservative justices, including 3 appointed by Trump in his first term, already have signaled strong support for the administration's position. The only officials who have so far survived efforts to remove them are Lisa Cook, a Federal Reserve governor, and Shira Perlmutter, a copyright official with the Library of Congress. For access and privacy, this isn't just constitutional theory. It could affect how aggressively regulators oversee sectors like finance, data protection, and consumer technology, and how insulated watchdogs really are from political pressure. At the same time, Michael R. Cizak reports on a looming disclosure deadline in the long-running Jeffrey Epstein saga. After years of litigation and public pressure, the U.S. Department of Justice has been ordered to release thousands of pages of records related to Epstein and his associates before Christmas. Due to the order, files and transcripts from Ghislaine Maxwell's sex trafficking case are being opened. However, a judge says people shouldn't expect to learn anything new from them. Some material has surfaced already through congressional inquiries and Freedom of Information Act requests. But this new tranche could shed further light on prosecutorial decisions, plea deals, and whether institutions properly investigated warnings. It's a reminder that high-profile cases often hinge on slow, grinding transparency work. And in the health privacy realm, Ali Swenson reports that the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has unveiled a new strategy to expand its use of artificial intelligence across the department, including in public health, patient care, and drug development. The plan embraces a try-first culture and even contemplates making tools like ChatGPT available to HHS staff, while centralizing huge volumes of health data. Experts warn that this kind of rapid modernization risks outpacing safeguards for some of the most sensitive personal information Americans have, their medical records. HHS previously faced criticism for pushing legal boundaries in its sharing of sensitive data when it handed over Medicaid recipients' personal health data to immigration and customs enforcement officials. Experts question how the department will ensure sensitive medical data is protected. Daryl West, senior fellow in the Brookings Institution's Center for Technology Innovation, noted the document's promise to strengthen risk management, but doesn't include detailed information about how that will be done. The strategy raises tough questions about vendor relationships, data sharing with other agencies, and how to prevent AI from amplifying existing inequities in healthcare. We close with stories that show how U.S. political and security choices ripple outward, shaping digital rights and democratic norms beyond its borders. In Europe, the Associated Press details warnings from European Council President Antonio Costa, who says elements of a U.S. policy blueprint backed by President Trump amounts to interference in Europe's internal affairs. The document, praised by Russia, presses European allies to align with a more transactional, America-first security vision. Costa said that while the strategy depicts European countries as an ally, allies don't threaten to interfere in the domestic political choices of their allies. The strategy was also critical of European free speech and immigration policy. For European Union leaders, this isn't just about NATO burdens. It's about preserving their ability to set domestic policy, including on data protection, online speech, and platform regulation, without being strong-armed by Washington or Moscow. From here, the documents appear to leave little doubt about who the United States views as allies and their long-term reliability as predictable partners supporting liberal democracies around the world. Meanwhile, other U.S. policy development has global privacy advocates and those in Canada on alert. Under proposals tied to its visa waiver program, the U.S. is moving toward expanded social media screening of foreign travelers who enter without a visa. Customs and Border Protection is proposing using 5 years' worth of social media content from travelers from select countries who take part in the visa waiver program and enter their information into the electronic system for travel authorization. The program automatically screens users and approves them for travel, removing the need for an interview at an embassy or consulate. Civil liberties groups warn this would normalize deep scrutiny of online speech as a condition of travel, chilling expression far beyond U.S. borders and creating new data sharing risks with allied governments. For Canadians and others who cross that border frequently, it's a stark example of how one country's security posture can quietly reshape everyone else's digital footprint. As always, we hope you found today's stories help you stay informed about how privacy, access to information, and public interest journalism are shaping law, information management, and public transparency. A few quick reminders. First, a big thank you to BC Information and Privacy Commissioner Michael Harvey for joining us recently on Access and Privacy Online. If you missed that episode, you can find the full-length interview or shorter clips in the podcast playlist. Next week will be our last regular news summary of 2025. We'll still be in your feeds after that with a year-end wrap-up and some special content, but this weekly format will take a short break over the holidays. So be sure to check back for some great FIPA information in the weeks ahead. We'll be bringing you a deep dive with Spencer Eisen on his preliminary report in BC, Ryan Retley's considerations in clause-by-clause analysis in FIPA, and of course, FIPA President Mike Larson and Executive Director Jason Waiwata. To help us keep the mics on, be sure to subscribe through FIPA News Monitoring or consider a donation to support our research and advocacy. Our writer is Sean Fisk. Original music in today's show was composed by Breakmaster Cylinder. I'm Patrick Farnsworth, your host and producer. Thank you for joining. A big FIPA thank you to all the contributors, reporters, and most importantly, to you, our listeners, who helped make this series so successful in 2025. Stay safe and stay informed.